Years ago, I was at a program on humor in the Bible. The leader reserved most of his laughter for the story of Jesus healing the mother-in-law of Jesus, and the speaker speculated on Peter's chagrin about the healing of his mother-in-law. But many of us were offended. Yes, there are in-law relationships that are very difficult, even toxic. There are many others who are as loving and supportive. In the audience, for example, who listened to the humor that day was a woman whose son had been divorced for over 10 years. 2 or 3 times a year, the former daughter-in-law came to visit for a weekend with her former mother-in-law. The end of the marriage could not end the love and respect these 2 women had for each other. I've seen numerous occasions when in-laws and former in-laws were equally loving. One of the most famous mothers-in-law in history, of course, is Naomi. Now, Ruth, as the daughter-in-law, gets most of the attention and the honor. But Naomi deserves honor for being such a great mother-in-law, and Orpah deserves kudos as well. Now, she would have traveled back to Israel with Naomi. There's no sign of reluctance in her story. But Naomi makes a logical argument about not going. Orpah concedes the force in Naomi's words, and she departs in tears. Orpah has nothing of which to be ashamed. At that moment, it's possible that Naomi sincerely didn't want her daughters-in-law to go with her. She seemed to be drowning in her sorrow, determined to go home alone and exist for a while before death. But she has enough love in her heart to want her daughters-in-law to be okay. Orpah is convinced. Ruth refuses to leave. Now, we can speculate endlessly on why Ruth chose differently. There was clearly love and friendship between Naomi and Orpah. And it's possible Naomi and Ruth had an even better relationship than Orpah and Naomi did. It's possible Orpah had a better family situation to return to than Ruth did. Orpah's family could have been better situated to arrange another marriage, or more willing to do so. Naomi seemed to think they both had a better shot with their birth families, but there's no comment on possible degrees of it, which is one is better than the other, perhaps. It's possible also that Ruth had loved her husband so much that she was desperate to hang on to his mother. We aren't told this, and Naomi says both Ruth and Orpah were excellent wives, so we can only wonder if more or deeper affection might have been present in one of the marriages than in the other. It's also possible Ruth could have had a more adventurous spirit than Orpah. Again, no criticism for Orpah. Taking risks, going on adventures, that's not everybody's cup of tea. There have been many women and men through the ages who needed conventional lives. The safe route isn't always the best route, but it is appealing to those who are uncomfortable with too much risk. Nor are all risks acceptable. There are some who risk much for little, like the kid who sticks his tongue on the frozen pole for a dare. Orpah had ventured out on the road. She was ready to travel to Israel. She only reluctantly returned home. Yes, there are many possible explanations for the difference between Orpah and Ruth. Lately, I've been considering one in particular. We have the few facts as to why Ruth did what she did, but we do know what she said to Naomi. Your God shall be my God. Now, there's something admirable in Ruth choosing to leave her religion, her home, her security, and everything else for the sake of Naomi. The words she spoke that day are sometimes used in wedding ceremonies between husbands and wives, but these words are first used to the mother-in-law. Ruth was a Moabite. She'd likely worshipped Moabite gods and goddesses. And let's face it, she'd married outside her religion. Her new family worshipped only one God, or at least they were supposed to only worship Yahweh. And we do know that some Israelites continued to lay incense on a number of altars for many centuries. But none of that could have made it easy for Ruth and Orpah. A wife was expected to follow her husband's religion, but that doesn't mean they felt the faith in the same way. The Israelite faith and culture often also did not look upon Moabites with a friendly eye. Now, that would not have included Naomi's family necessarily, because they seem to have had no trouble with arranging marriages between their sons and Moabite women. But it doesn't mean that Ruth or Orpah were necessarily comfortable in the faith of their husbands. But here is Ruth saying to Naomi, your God shall be my God. We don't know how Ruth's family might have felt about that decision to abandon their gods. What if they worried if their gods would be offended? Others might have been called their version, others might have called her their version of faithless or apostate. In the Israelite faith, the prophets certainly saw, when they saw Israelites turning to other gods and goddesses, they said it was like adultery or something of that sort. So that might have been how Ruth was seen once Orpah went back and said, hey, she's going with Naomi. She's promising to worship Yahweh. On the other hand, they might have shrugged. After all, it would be difficult to live in Israel and not worship Yahweh. Gods were seen as territorial. So her friends and family could have thought she was simply being practical, switching to the God who was in charge in Israel. Of course, saying that the Moabites worshipped other gods is not to say that none of them had any use for Yahweh. The Israelites sometimes ran into non-Israelites who still honored Yahweh. It's possible that Ruth and her family already had sympathies in that direction. But whether or not her family, her birth family, had any initial liking for Yahweh, Ruth had spent 10 years in association with her husband and her mother-in-law, and they must have been good witnesses to the faith. Ruth must have learned a great deal about Yahweh, the laws, the beliefs. She would have heard about the ethics. She would have heard of the statement, for example, that they were to love God and to love their neighbors as themselves. Many centuries later, spiritually hungry Gentiles would be attracted in large numbers to the Israelite faith for the same reasons. They found little in their pagan temples to feed their hearts, but in Yahweh they found an integration of spirituality and of ethical living. Naomi didn't have things like the book of Proverbs, which was written centuries later, to talk about things like giving to the poor is the same as giving to the Lord, but it's quite possible some of those teachings still surfaced in early centuries. There was something that was very attractive in the Israelite faith. And so the question I've been considering is whether Ruth really was leaving her childhood faith and embracing the faith of her mother-in-law as much as anything. It's possible she was acting on a faith she already had. It was possible that she was choosing to continue her relationship with God in the same way she was choosing to continue her relationship with Naomi. Because if she'd gone back to her family and let them arrange a marriage with another man, if she was devout to Yahweh, she would have been a fish out of water, a woman who sincerely worshiped Yahweh while her family insisted she had to join their faith. Ruth behaves like a woman whose life and actions are integrated with her faith. Now, there's no way to know that journey of faith she took. It's possible she'd been trembling on the edge of faith for a long time, and it was at that moment she expressed it. She went, wow, if I let her go, Naomi's going to be alone, and I will have lost that connection to this God that I'm really attracted to. I don't know. But I think we can safely assume that along the way, Ruth had seen something good in the messages about Yahweh. Even though at that moment, Naomi, let's face it, wasn't probably a figure of faith. She was too discouraged. She was too disheartened by life. And that happens sometimes. We go through periods when it doesn't necessarily come naturally. But the amazing thing, the wonderful thing, is that sometimes others have been inspired to come in and support and help us, the way Ruth did for Naomi. The truth is that Ruth's life took on new meaning in service and in faith, and she must have passed that on. We know that she became an ancestress of David, and she is listed in the New Testament as an ancestress of Jesus. Her life is part of what built for the time when it was the right time for Jesus to come. And so may we also build for the future and the witness of faith. Amen.